live stream. Okay. Okay, I understand. Welcome. I'm Lillian Crum. I'm Assistant Professor of Graphic Design here at Lawrence Technological University. We're at full capacity, which is really exciting. For those of you who may not find a seat in here, even on the stairs, we are live streaming on our website, so you can listen to the lecture there. Now, this isn't my first time introducing Michael Bierut to a group of people. We teach Michael Bierut's work in class. When we speak about influential graphic design with students, we talk about his work. When we talk about politically relevant work, we talk about Michael Bierut's work. When we discuss an essay published on Design Observer, for example, we mention Michael Bierut as being one of the website's co-founders. When we talk about New York design firm Pentagram, we acknowledge Michael Bierut as being one of the partners. When we talk about Massimo Vignelli, we acknowledge that Michael Bierut is his protege. Some of the reading we're doing in class is Michael Bierut's. And so tonight I'm honored to be able to introduce Michael Bierut in person. And judging by the capacity here, I know that we're all excited. So please welcome Michael Bierut.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you, Carl Dolphin. Thank you, Lawrence Tech, for inviting me here. Thank everyone from Lawrence Tech who's here and everyone who's come from other places to be here to pack this auditorium. I'm really proud and happy to be talking to you. I put together a presentation, it's me, that I call Graphic Architecture, partly because I was invited by the dean of the school, who's an architect, so I wanted this to seem like a legitimate source of continuing add credits for architects who are seeking to kind of maintain their certification as architects. But Lillian kind of alluded to the connection that I have with architecture. It's because although I was born in the Midwest, in Cleveland, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, that's 1969, Easter Sunday. That's me in the back, my mom and dad, and my twin brothers, Ronald and Donald, I sort of didn't know, neither my mom nor my dad were architects or designers or anything like that, but when I moved to New York, my very first job, which I was to have for 10 years, was with Massimo and Leila Vignelli. Some of you graphic designers may know their names from design history. Amazingly talented protean designers who were capable of designing anything from, as they say in Italian, from a spoon to a city. They could do everything from graphic design to interior design to product design to even fashion design. And because they were both trained as architects, even though I knew very little about architecture when I arrived in New York, I had been trained, as many of you have been or are so being, trained as a graphic designer. I learned about architecture by osmosis. So the work I'm going to show you today, or this evening, is mostly stuff that has to do with the relationship of graphic design and architecture. So I sort of gave it the subtitle, which is sort of how to make architecture out of paper. You know, how to translate between 2 dimensions and 3, and what happens when those 2 things come together. You guys can hear me okay? Loud nasal Cleveland accent for the win. I did this book called How To, because that's one of the things that I'm really interested in, is sort of not just what a design looks like, but what lies behind it. So there's, you could ask why, or who, or what, but in the book, I just really wanted to explain sort of, what the steps are that lead from a commission to actually doing the work. And so most of the stuff I do will kind of follow some of the tracks that I laid out in that book. So there's just a series of case histories, and I'll take you through them now. And each one of them have something to do with architecture, but they're really graphic design. Don't panic, graphic designers, you're in safe hands. So I was asked more than 15 years ago by another dean of the School of Architecture, a guy named Robert A.M. Stern, to design all the graphics for the Yale School of Architecture. He was newly appointed dean there. And I have, in my practice at Pentagram, I have lots of clients, and the clients, if any of you guys have practices on any level whatsoever, you're familiar with this idea, someone will ask you to design something for them, and your task is to figure out what they really want. You know, sometimes, there's one chair there. That's the chair I was sitting in. I'm not gonna sit in it for this presentation. That's it, I think, for chairs, sorry. They say, I need a graphic program for my School of Architecture, design all the graphics for it. And that's, you need to know that, but then there's always some other agendas that they have, agendae that they have. And in the case of Dean Stern, I think he had a concern or a fear or something he wanted to dispel. He has a very, very, very successful practice in New York, and not all of his work, but a lot of his work is what you'd call contextual or even historicist in nature. If you want someone to design a building that will fit in with the buildings around that building, he's perfect for that. He's a fantastic historian, a really thoughtful writer, and can design anything to sort of fit knowingly and sensitively into any environment. And I think his worry was that he just disliked this assumption that with his arrival at Yale, he would make everyone design the way he designed, because he was a practitioner, right? And instead, he has this very omnivorous, diverse set of interests, diverse set of stylistic influences, in fact. And so he sort of just said, I want to surprise people. So hence the disorientation. So I designed a whole series of big, fat books, monographs for Bob Stern, all of which were, Trajan typography, centered serif, classic layouts. And I think the fear was that Yale would look like that, look like it was ready to be carved in stone. And so I came in with a single-page proposal, and a two-page proposal. I said, not this, but this, okay? And I said, instead of making everything look the same, we're gonna never use the same typeface twice. We'll just keep changing it up over and over and over again. Just when someone thinks they know what's coming, we're gonna change it up and deliver something else. So we did all sorts of different work for him over the 15 or so years that he was the dean, including this long series of posters, each one of which was around 2 by 3 feet. The size was always the same. Each one of which was almost, except for one, they were all black and white. There was one that had just a little bit of blue in it, but the rest of them, there were about 80 of them in all when we were done, were all black and white. And each one of them had no logo, but they had a Y in a circle, and that was sort of the logo that we sort of established for the School of Architecture, but that Y for Yale could change every single time. And so it was about sort of using eclecticism, using variety, using non-conformity as a identifier. And so I'm just going to show you some of the posters that we did and explain what they were for really quickly so you sort of get a hang of what we're doing. So these were all early ones we did. This was one about art and architecture at Yale, so overlapping shapes and things, really radically different typefaces. You can tell how old this series is for you kids in the audience who haven't even seen Mad Men. Back in the day, back before PowerPoint and Keynote and laptop computers and digital projectors, we used to take pictures, mount them in cardboard, put them in projectors. There'd be this loud fan that would project light through them onto a wall like the one behind me. And they came in slides like this. So a different typeface for every one of the speakers announcing a lecture series. This announced another lecture series for Yale where instead of different typefaces, it was different arrows. This was another lecture series where we just used different, because it's all about talking, right? So different quotation marks in different typefaces. This is another lecture series where just all the names coagulate together to form one big piece of punctuation. The variety there is in the framing devices. And then we sort of did a whole series of things. I got interested in sort of, could you program it so you didn't have to design it? So this was like, computers existed by this point now, you can tell. We've entered some more modern era. So this is just sort of like, frames piling up on your screen and what happens then. So all of the lectures are one thing and the symposia all on another layer. Then they've done thematic things over the years, a whole symposium on the subject of architecture and psychoanalysis. And so here we've taken the content of the symposium, actually literally put it on the psychiatrist's couch. Because it's for architects, that's a couch designed by Mies van der Rohe. And because it's about psychiatry, the Y, if you can see, is actually a Rorschach blot that I made. This is about architecture in the city, the idea of density being the main driver of urban life. This is a symposium on the architect Charles Moore, who known for a lot of different things, but to a graphic designer, he's known for his use of super graphics, particularly at a thing called Sea Ranch in California, a lot of stripy things. So a big CM rendered in characteristic Charles Moore super graphic stripes. Every once in a while they'd give me something where I had no idea like what it meant. And so they did something called non-standard structures in organic order of irregular geometries, hybrid members, and chaotic assemblies. And so this is advice that I give everyone all the time, my students, and you can have it as well. If, like, when in doubt, if you're just given some words and you're not sure what they mean, and you're not sure that people are supposed to know what they mean, just make them really big and just put them there and just say them really loud, like, you know, of course you know what this means, right? So I actually do sort of know what this means. As it turns out, I'm being a little facetious. Evidently, this has something to do with if you kind of do design that's programmed kind of algorithmically or mathematically or computationally, it will generate these unexpected things like irregular geometries, hybrid members, chaotic assemblies, whatever that says. And so we happen to get a beta version of a typeface that nerdy for the graphic designers, Jonathan Heffler, Tobias Fair-Jones had designed for the Wall Street Journal for their financials, back when they had financials. And so you see, I won't do this often, but what's cool about this typeface is they built in these ink traps, and you see where like the N is hitting, and it sort of has a spot? It's because it's supposed to be printed really small in the newspaper, and when it prints in the newspaper, that fills in with the ink so it looks like a regular N, but we printed it really big so you could see all these weird irregularities that were generated by the means of production of the actual poster. I won't do that often, I promise, but, or I can do that privately with anyone who wants afterwards. Yale has, the School of Architecture has open houses, and those are the easiest posters. You just do some nice big thing that looks fun. I like arrows, as people who followed Hillary Clinton's campaign know. So it turns out that certain typefaces, the Y has an arrow in it in the negative space that points at Yale School of Architecture up there. It's another open house poster. They did a symposium called Seduction, I know a lettering artist named Marion Banges who lives up in Canada, and I asked Marion to just do some lettering that just looked really kind of sexy and lacy and kind of, you know, kind of gooey with seduction, and so she did that. This is a Rebus Open house. And then I sort of like decided to do something where, like this is really, where I just said, you know, the smallest type on these posters was 14-point Franklin Gothic. So I said, let's make all the type 14-point Franklin Gothic and indicate its importance just by either making it bold or light or underlining it. The most important things are underlined and bold. And so even the Y at the bottom is made out of a bunch of smaller Ys that are all 14-point Franklin Gothic. You know, we did 80 of these, so we just experimented with different things. And they were really unhappy with this poster, by the way. This is about, you know, architecture in Berlin, famously a divided city, even the Y here is divided. Another open house poster, the Y made out of keys. Poster for the designer and architect George Nelson, who is a Yale graduate. Nelson, famous as a consultant to Herman Miller, and in that capacity designed a whole bunch of things, including his studio designed the clock that looks like that. People call it informally the atomic clock because it has those colored balls around it. And I have this interesting thing that I know how to do where I can, it's not quite a Rain Man sort of thing, but I sort of like knew that, without even counting, that George Nelson had 12 letters. I could tell that just if I felt it, and sure enough, you can put it around a clock and it works perfectly. So one after another, and then there's, and what was great about these posters is we did so many of them that I would have different designers in my office sort of like co-design them. So I'd give them a prompt, I'd say, really skinny typography, go. So Jessica Svensson could do something like this. This is about the display of architecture, and so a little Y is on a little pedestal. This is about digital, what does it mean? Digital postmodernities. And so we just substituted numbers for the letters where we could. Yale Architecture 2014, it says somewhere. This is called reverse stress typeface, where all the things that are normally thin are made thick and vice versa. This is I think this is a diagram that Buckminster Fuller first did, I believe, about, it's a Dymaxion map where all the continents are represented faithfully or as faithfully as possible as you can do them in 2 dimensions. And it was about globalism and architecture, roughly speaking. And this was the last poster I think we did for Bob Stern. It was the last open house. People who know the building that school is in, it's Paul Rudolph building with a very rough poured concrete exterior, and it's in the S, as you can see up there. There's a new dean there, Deborah Burke, and we've been doing a year's worth of posters for her, and the first thing we did was made, all the posters are on colored paper. They're all like color, which is just like the most shocking, insane thing you can do. These are like regular colors. It's not like they're strange colors, but any color at all after 15 years of this diet of straight black and white. So people, I think, were opened the envelope and just passed out when they saw neon green. So good for them. One of the things that I find really interesting about graphic design is that just sort of like, in fact, so it relates a little bit to the way Dean Stern has his practice. He does a little bit of time travel where he sort of is trying to imagine, if I was building, these buildings were all built in 1920. If I was building a building in 1920, what would it look like, right? I don't think it's the only question you can ask as a designer, but there's something interesting about trying to tap into the essence of something that preceded us. And so this is a really relatively small assignment we had to do new signs for this older building. This is the headquarters for Lever Brothers, which is now Unilever, but in 1952 it was called Lever Brothers. It was the first glass and steel skyscraper built on Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan by Gordon Bunshaft of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. It's a beautiful building. It is a gem of a building. It's just so nice. It's actually much smaller than you think, and really just a lovely little building. So they asked us to come in and because they were renovating the building, they needed to upgrade all the signs to make it ADA compliant, and they said, would you guys do the signage for it? So we looked at all the existing typefaces that were out there, and none of them quite seemed right. And I said, why don't we take most of our fee and invest it in getting exactly the right typeface? So there were already some letters on the outside of the building that sort of, this was before, if some of you guys know that typeface Neutroface that House Industries did, little like that, but not even quite. And so we had, again, we had Tobias Frere-Jones and Jonathan Heffler do like forensic typography on this, where they just sort of like came into this crime scene, if you will, and figured out from just these letters what the whole alphabet would look like, and they delivered the digital alphabet to us. So it's an older building, as you can see. They came up with something called Lever Sands. There the whole thing is. And then we just kind of like played the whole thing out through the building. And the fee was not that big. We gave most of it to the type designers, but I think it was the right choice because if you go there, it's also like a sort of a humble choice, and not just we deprived ourselves of money, but I think it also is, it's an opportunity to show off as a designer or come up with a contemporary interpretation of what it would be like, but we just sort of reasoned, the way to serve the moment is just to do something that feels like it's perfectly suited for what it is, right? So you can sort of see it. Most of these signs were new signs that weren't there at the beginning because they had to be newly invented. This was, and then they decided to, even where there were existing signs, this is the sign that's in the original photograph. They took down all those letters and reinstalled new letters to replace them so everything just was perfectly sharp, nice and new. I believe the only old signs are down in the lower left-hand corner where it says Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, the name of the architect, and the George Fuller Company was the name of the construction manager. So this is real time travel. This is a project we did at this point 20 years ago for Disney. Walt Disney Company, as most of you know, they have these theme parks, both on the West Coast where Disneyland is and in Florida where Disney World is. They really own a lot of land in Central Florida around Orlando. And at one point in the 90s, they did an analysis and decided that the best use of that land would not be to build another theme park, but instead to build a housing development for people to live in. And so they embarked on this really almost utopian visionary project to figure out what this should look like, decided to build it on in the tradition, perfect word for it, of what's called the new urbanism, which is small lots mixing a walkable city that mixes uses, so it's not like there's people live here and then there's stores there. The stores are mixed in with the houses. The houses are close to the street. The parking is sort of suppressed and behind. You're meant to walk more than drive. You can bike more than walk, and whatever you want to do. But it's meant to be a very walkable city, built in the middle of nowhere literally on a swamp, right? And some of you may know that EPCOT stands for, I think, Experimental Prototypes Community of Tomorrow. This was Disney's original idea. He wanted people to live in Epcot. And that never happened. It turned into a theme park. So they decided, okay, he's onto something there, let's do it, right? And so this is the master plan for this town, which is called Celebration, Florida, which is just celebrated it's like 23rd or so birthday. It opened in the mid-90s, in 94, 95, I think. There is someone on a bike riding around in Celebration, Florida, just to prove that it actually happens. We were commissioned, they asked, it was this huge, it wasn't built by Disney designers. They commissioned a bunch of architects, including my client, Robert A.M. Stern, Jacqueline Robertson, Philip Johnson, Michael Graves, Caesar Pelli, Charles Moore. All these different architects contributed to buildings and planning around Celebration, Florida, and we were asked to be the coordinating graphic designer. So I think I'm good at working with architects, but this was like a daunting kind of jury to present in front of. And we had to determine what the street signs would look like, what the manhole covers would look like, what the wayfinding signs would look like, and what all the signs on all the public buildings would look like, right? And so, I remember we looked at a bunch of different typefaces, and I realized that it probably, because it sort of had a domestic sort of feel, needed to be a serif typeface. But most serif typefaces are really delicate, and there's a few that are robust, and one of the robust ones is called Cheltenham, which is from about I think 1898 or so. It's like just around the turn of the century, right? And so Cheltenham worked perfectly. You could make it, it's thick enough you could make it out of metal, but it's serify, and it kind of looks sort of its time and sort of fit in with the mood of the architecture they were proposing. And it had one great other attribute, which is that it was designed by an architect. It was designed by Bertram Goodhue, who designed the Nebraska State Capitol and St. Bartholomew's Cathedral on Park Avenue. So I went in and did this presentation, and I said, here's what the street signs will look like, here's what the manhole covers look like, and you might be wondering about the typeface. So all these architects were, yes, what is that typeface? And I said, well, it's called Cheltenham, and I described all its attributes, and I sort of said it. And they were looking very skeptically at me, like making notes, can't it be Helvetica? What if it were microgramma or Euro style or one of those typefaces that architects like? And I said, is this, is that? It sort of has this weight, it's a serif thing. It's, and I said, and it was designed by Bertram Goodhue. And then you see them all relax. Oh, Bertram Goodhue, thank you. And so, we ended up doing all the signs there. And some people find it an eerie place because it has a little of that, the Truman Show was shot not at Celebration, but at Seaside, Florida, which is same idea, but on the Panhandle as opposed to Central Florida. And it does have a little bit of that, but it's, compared to what? My mom and my mother-in-law both lived in condo developments in Florida. My mom lived in Brandywine Acres. My mother-in-law lived in Whiskey Creek Estates. So you're getting sort of the idea, right? Nothing to do, just open another one and pour yourself a long one. It's almost happy hour, right? So rather than a life of quiet and inebriated desperation, this is a place of happiness and activity and vitality. And so this is like a giant, giant tree with a beautiful fence around it that, again, we tried not to make it branded too much, but we just embedded the word celebration here and there where appropriate. A lot of signs from those days had pictorial elements in it, so we did this thing with a tree and a fence and a girl on a bike with a dog, and you can see all those elements up there, the tree being the natural element, the fence being the man-made element, the girl being the human element, and the dog representing the dog element, I guess. Indispensable for modern life. There are signs in the park. We designed a lot of manhole covers, and so some of the manhole cover designs we didn't use turned into things like fountains, this one with a compass rose on it. And then when we were designing signs for the major buildings, we sort of switched up the style of them so they weren't all in Cheltenham. So we just made them out of mosaics, we made them in cast metal, manhole cover, neon signs like that, all sorts of different things. This is the Celebration Twin that Caesar Pelli did. And then it came time for us to do like the sales center. Well, while this place was under construction, if you needed to buy a house, you would kind of go there and they'd sell you the house, the way it happens anywhere, right? And so the sales center was just like a bunch of trailers back together, as happens on construction sites, and they asked us to come up with like a design treatment. So they had these beautiful renderings of the houses, and all we did is we took the renderings and blew them up life size. So that's not a house, that's actually a billboard of a house. And that we just built out the little portico in front, and so, you know, basically it just had 3 different styles of houses, all very nice. You could really get a sense of what you were buying. What you're buying would be a little bit, you know, these were like mirages. As you'd approach them, you know, they'd look real, then suddenly something was wrong, right? You know, these are the fake houses in Celebration. And so on the inside, because it was all under construction, we built it all on top of a giant blueprint, printed the blueprint on the floor. It's all just wood studs, and you know, we didn't put in any walls or anything. It all just kind of like plays out just like the construction site that it is. And so there's you know, the logo on the floor, a little credit block for Pentagram, my firm, in the corner, and then you can get swag there, including a watch. In which that little dog catches the girl on the bike like every minute. Isn't that cute? So this is another architectural project. This is for a very, very modern building. The headquarters of the New York Times, designed by Renzo Piano Building Workshop. It is a glass and steel building on 8th Avenue between 40th and 41st Streets. And it's the headquarters, as I said before, the New York Times. I think that Renzo Piano's vision for the headquarters was to make it just a really transparent building because of the idea of journalism being a way to provide a view onto the world and the transparency of the journalistic process, right? So the Times actually started on Times Square. That's why it's called Times Square, actually. Their original headquarters was right smack dab in the middle. And then they moved for most of their history to a building on 43rd Street, which is this big mess of stone and concrete, very like with small windows and real kind of warren of offices inside. And this was like the beloved home that the New York Times stayed in for most of its history, actually. And in the basement of this building is where they would print the paper. These little lamps were above these garages, out of which delivery trucks would emerge pre-dawn every morning with the paper to be delivered to people's houses. And so this was really like a factory for literally making paper newspapers, right? And so they were moving into this glass and steel building. And so it's like solid glass from top to bottom, which is actually not a great idea for a building because they get really hot in the summer and really cold in the winter. So to mitigate that, what Piano did was he put in these screens made out of slender horizontal rods that provide shade in the summer and kind of heat retention in the winter, right? And so there are the rods that you can see through and then the glass and the steel. So it's basically still very transparent. Now, I kept saying, you know, was the idea that if you look at the front page of the New York Times, the grid that it's laid out on is shaped like this and it has all these horizontal lines where and that's how graphic designers think. Every time I propose that to Piano or any of the architects, they look at me as if I was insane. Like, you're saying we built the building to look just like the newspaper? Why would we do that? No. You know, that's not how architects think. That's how graphic designers think, unfortunately. So I worked for the New York Times for years on very small projects. That's Times Square. And this was the biggest one we ever worked on. And it had a funny sort of thing happening with it, that the Times building is actually in the Times Square Special Signage District. And as far as I know, this is the only signage district I think in North America. There may be others around the world, but this is the only one in America where most municipalities have rules about signs. It's all about making the sign small. You can't have a big sign. You can't have an electric sign. You can't have a flashing sign because those things are all ugly, ugly, ugly. We want things to look more like Celebration Florida, real nice, right? Picket fences, everything pretty. And these flashy signs are ugly, right? someone determined, well, I know exactly who determined it, Tibor Coleman, working with Robert Ames Stern again, came up with this master plan for Times Square that said, look, we want to preserve the character of Times Square, which looks like that, big flashing signs attached to every building, every which way. That's what people around the world think of when they're picturing Times Square. If corporate entities like the New York Times were building new buildings and they're just these glass and steel things, how bland would that be? We want to make sure that Times Square stays Times Square. So every building that goes up in this district is required by, it's mandated to have large signs attached to it, okay? And so, believe me, there aren't that many architects that are like enthusiastic about that aspect. They're thrilled to be building in the center of Manhattan, less thrilled about this idea about like now, design a beautiful building, wait, here are some giant signs to stick on it now. So we were given this challenge, you know, heightened by the fact that it's a glass building and there's like nowhere to put the signs because it's blocking someone's view wherever you put it. So the solution we came up with was if you took the New York Times logo and divided it up just like remember all those little rods? Like divided it up so it's like little things stuck on those rods. What you could do is make these little teardrop shapes that are like that aren't that much bigger than that, and attach them to the rods and line them all up just so. And there's something like 820 something of these rods, and if they're all arranged the right way, they actually spell out New York Times. And if you look at them straight on, you can sort of see through them. If you look at them from underneath, they all fill in, and so it looks solid, right? So it's you get it sort of both ways. And I remember when we realized we were going to do this, we were so excited, and I thought, because we couldn't figure out how to do it, and we realized we could do it just by rasterizing the logo more or less, but then we thought we won't be able to read it, then we came up with that teardrop thing, so we were really excited. Then I remember saying, you know, what would really be cool if it was like white on white, so it was like embossed on the building. Wouldn't that be cool? Someone thinks that's a good idea, right? And then I started saying, you know, then at different times of day, sometimes it would be there, sometimes it wouldn't be there, and this idea got all the way up to like the publisher of the Times, so I was like pitching this idea to him, and I was like really excited about it. I could see he was like, he's saying, so it's a big sign, except sometimes you wouldn't be able to see it. And I'm like, yeah, that's what makes it great, you know, so it's like there's a sign, and he said, then he finally said, you know, on the front page of the Times, it's black. I think it should be black on our building. I said, okay, so it's black. So what's cool is from the inside, though, you can look right through it, and your view is unimpeded. The view of these people is the east facade of the Port Authority bus terminal, not the most beautiful view in New York. I'm also told this is the obituary department. I'm not sure that's true, but there's something funny about that. And so that's how it looks at night. And then we had the commission to do not just this big glamorous sign, which is the biggest thing I've ever designed, actually. It stretches the entire city block, basically. But we were given the task of also designing all of the other signs on the site, including all the room and door signs that are, again, required not just to identify the people who work there, like then Frank Rich and still Maureen Dowd, but also to just identify the rooms with a code number and Braille, just so that people are able to find them, and they're satisfy the codes of the fire marshal, who has to grant the certificate of occupancy for the building, right? So a lot of the signs just have people's names, and you know what to do there. But then they have all these other signs that identify just functions for rooms. And one thing that we sort of got from the people at the Times was that they were a little bit they missed that horrible old building they were in. They sort of missed the idea that the paper was printed in the basement. This was like, I mean, this building is beautiful, and the interiors are beautiful. It's really beautiful, but it's sort of, they said, can we make it feel not just like a beautiful corporate building, but something that feels like the New York Times? And the guy we were working with had this request, and we said, okay, we've got an idea. What if we like made every one of these signs different by finding a picture from the archives of the Times and doing it to associate specificity with each one of the functions? So every men's room has a picture of men doing something on it, like manly things. Every women's room has a different picture of women doing things. Sometimes just walking, sometimes doing that. Then they have a room where they literally lay out page 1 of the paper every day, so a bunch of excited people, excited about seeing page 1. They have a video edit room, equipment room. They have a bunch of team rooms, so we have people doing things in teams, little tugboats all guiding a giant boat into harbor, literal teams celebrating a victory, people dancing in unison. So no two of these are alike. There's we got a conspiracy going with the guy who actually was in charge of the photo archive, which in the newspaper is called the morgue. Very kind of it's kind of depressing at the New York Times, the obituaries and more. This was like, this guy just went crazy and found us so many pictures. We printed them with an exaggerated dot pattern, and then they're printed on metal, so it really feels like the plates they would print the old picture on, or the old newspaper on. You know, that's more what the New York Times looks like, people talking to each other in conference rooms, actually. Pantry, the copy room, the stat room. Like sometimes I wasn't sure what these rooms were, actually. I think this has to do with statistics, but maybe not, but we thought it would look like that. Then, because it's, okay, so it's all glass. It's all glass inside. All the rooms are glass except for the occasional room which is opaque and has a door on it. Those are called the privacy rooms. And I guess you just go in there, to like take that phone call from your doctor about the tests that just came in, or to break up with your boyfriend or something, and so you need privacy for those things. Those were fun to do. I'm not an architect. I don't know what a riser closet is or what happens in it, but I picture things rising, and so these guys were rising. I don't know. And then they have a balcony, so that's where. I've got a. I'm not stressing process too much, but this is an instance where I had a really good idea, which was not quite the idea it should have been. And so it's for a museum in New York called the Museum of Arts and Design. And they came to us because they had a new building they had commissioned from a talented architect named Brad Klupfel. And they were going to an existing building that was this fun building that sits on Columbus Circle in New York. It's a squarish building that sits on this, like the one complete round traffic circle in Manhattan. And it was built back in the early 60s by Edward Durrell Stone, and was opaque, had no windows at all. A really strange building, peculiar building. And Klupfel got the commission to renovate it and make it suitable to be a museum of craft and design. And he sort of cut these different glass slots into the exterior, then further moved the slots into the floor. And then we were commissioned to do the signs for the building and to come up with a new identity for the building, a new logo and graphic program for the building. And I knew exactly what to do. From the first minute I sort of saw his plans. So here's what Klupfel did, right? So you sort of see those slots doing their thing, right? And sort of further, the slots go on the floors and the ceilings. It's like they just go like this through the whole building. And I said, we're gonna do a logo that looks exactly the same way. We're gonna take the name of the museum and do just one line and spell the whole thing out. And there it is, A+D for Arts plus Design. So you may be thinking what they were thinking, which is I thought our name was MAD, Museum of Arts and Design, MAD. And I said, yeah, good name, but it turns out oddly there are rules for doing this thing, and you can do it with A+D, but you can't do it with MAD. It just won't work. It will not work. And we tried and tried and tried. It just won't work. It won't work. I mean, it's about topography or something. It's like a Mobius strip. There's just some unviolable kind of rule where you cannot do it with one line. You can try if you want. I couldn't do it. And so, but who cares really? Because if you think about their name, the museum part, who cares about that? It's the subject matter. It's arts and design, A+D, right? That's the important. I see some people nodding. You're sort of buying this, okay? So, so I thought, that's what you want to get people excited about. So will people call us A+D? Is that what, I'm like, yeah, they would. Yeah, sure, they'd call you that. And then they say, well, like, can you see the A and the D up there, right? Because you can see the A. And then there's that thing that's like the D. And they say, well, how do I know that's a D? It's a D because D's are curved and it's notched on the top there, right? And then, well, if it's notched on the top, why isn't it notched on the bottom? It won't work if you notch it on the bottom. It can't be one line. And so I was like, but this is a great idea. Let me prove it to you. So I took the idea back to the office and I said, okay, guys, we're gonna hit this thing hard. I can sell this. Just give me the stuff. And so we said it can be all these different colors. We can color it in all these different ways and kind of change it all the time. Won't that be cool? And we can do like press kits and stationery and all this other stuff. So I went in and I showed this stuff, and they were still kind of like skeptical. And I was like, okay, I'll be back. And so I came back and I had shopping bags, right? And here it is on a shopping bag, surely now, right? And then I remember I literally had like 3 and they were so patient and so nice and so open-ended about me changing the name of their museum, me selling them, me convincing them that people would recognize these lines as being letters, and this was all a good thing because I had this idea that I had literally in the first minute that I was thinking about the whole project. So finally I remember I sort of came back after being rejected for the umpteenth time, and I came back to the office and I said, this isn't gonna work, let's start over. And I remember at that moment feeling this like sense of like joy and release. It was just acceptance, as opposed to like this like pounding and pounding and pounding against this thing. And then I said, well, what if we just, like their name is MAD, what if we just did MAD? And what if it's not about those slots, which no one but me seems to give a damn about, but what if it's like it's a square building on a circle? So what if we just take, there's a circle, what if we take squares and circles, 3 circles, put them in squares, MAD, bang, like that, right? I went in, I said, okay, got an idea, how about this? And it was like, thank you, it's like done. And so this was just like like sometimes you sort of like, you know, your job is to get in the house, right? And you're a master like locksmith, like lock, what do you call lock picker? You can pick locks. You're a burglar, a cap roller, you know, and you can sneak in. And like you're just kind of like trying to get that lock working, and you can't get the lock working. Then you sort of like get a screwdriver. Maybe you can just take the whole assembly for the doorknob off. Then you'll reach in. Then finally you think, oh, I'm just gonna break the door in, and sort of, and then if you're smart, you just kind of like walk around to the back. And there's like a screen door that goes to the family room, and it's just open and unlocked, and you just walk right in. So this is what their logo looks like. And look, you can just put some nice Futura with it. You can do all that other stuff we were doing with the other one, and it even works better. Not only that, but he made a whole alphabet out of it. And then that means they can own all 26 letters. Then you can write all these things in it. You know, then it was sort of like, like the idea number one, like everything was just sort of like drilling a cavity. It was like, just this won't hurt a bit, you know. And this was like fun. It was like, oh, why don't we do this? Why don't we that? We were just like, you know, everyone in the office was just kind of coming up with this stuff. And so banners, you know, all kinds of stuff. And then the signage was like really simple. Everything about it was like so easy and so simple. The stuff for the gift shop, shopping bag. You know, you do boxes, it makes this great repeat pattern. It's just all very, very simple. So sometimes if like one of my partners is Paula Scher, and I always go to her for advice. And sometimes I say, I've got this really good idea and I can't make it work. And I said that in this case. And she says, well, sometimes that means it's not a good idea. And she was exactly right about that. And you would get a necktie with that repeat pattern, then a t-shirt that says, if you can read this, you are mad. It's not a very legible typeface, but it does fit their enthusiastic following. So I highly recommend that museum if you go there. It's not the Met, it's not MoMA, it's not the Whitney, but it's a beautiful gem of a museum. I promise you'll have a great time there. And you'll see, and you won't even notice the logo. It fits in with everything else so beautifully. It's hardly there at all, which is how it should be. And this is sort of like the story of my life, actually. I like to talk. I consider myself very persuasive. And what I kind of found out along the way is you never learn anything by talking. You only learn things by listening. A lot of times with my clients, I just have to force myself to listen. So this is another story like that where I think I'll show you not just one bad idea, but maybe 4 bad ideas. So this gets better and better if what you like is seeing bad ideas. This is going to get really nice. So this is for a project in Miami, Florida, New World Symphony. There's a guy there who is the head of New World Symphony called Michael Tilson Thomas. He's a conductor and a composer, and founded this place, which is a concert venue and an academy for advanced musicians and players and conductors. So it functions both as an educational institution and a performance venue in the heart of Miami, Florida. And they commissioned a building from Frank Gehry to be the new home of it. So just like up at MAD, new building, new identity, and could we help, right? People keep asking me to do this. You know, I've already shaken your confidence in my ability to do it, but yet they came back again with another request. Oddly enough, there's a bit of trivia. Frank Gehry babysat Michael Tilson Thomas when they both grew up in LA. So they knew each other as young men, very young men in the case of MTT, which is how some people call him. You know, Gehry always starts with these very vigorous sketches. So the idea with this building was rectangular form with stuff exploding out of it, right? And it really looks like this, big rectangular thing, and then there are all these shapes on the inside that are kind of doing typical Frank Gehry things in my mind. And so this is another one where I thought I had a really good idea at the beginning. So I had 2 ideas. One was that I hated the 3-letter acronym NWS because for two things. I don't like three-letter acronyms for one thing, and then one of the letters was a W, meaning you didn't save any time saying it. NWS versus New World Symphony. You know, it's just faster to say the whole thing than to choke out that letter W, right? So I said, okay, we're gonna use the whole name, New World Symphony, which is just so beautiful sounding, and we'll somehow relate it to the Gehry building. So I thought, okay, I've got an idea. So the idea is we're gonna kind of like have it morph like those shapes, and the idea was you take something like that, then you do this with it, right? So it's just like the Gehry shapes, right? And it could be all these different combinations, the infinite variety of musical composition dramatized by this corporate identity, right? So I sent this down to them expecting them to say, how can we thank you? And instead their question was, did you plan to make us nauseous? Because this is like kind of sickening looking, the way this kind of goes in and out. They really didn't, they just had a visceral bad reaction to this. But I was like, okay, that was my first idea. I got more where that came from, stand by. So I thought, okay, they have like, they both play, they have students but they're playing also like the traditional repertoire of like Beethoven and Bach and Mozart and things like that. They're doing new things and old things. So what if we combine like a really old letter form and a new letter form, and then it just so happens that it works out quite nicely in a way if you sort of alternate them like a metronome, you know, no old, new, old, new, old, new. So I showed this to them. Again, it uses the full name and everything, and I thought, I really got it going on now, it's really good. And they liked this a little bit more, but I could tell they didn't quite like it enough. And Michael Tilson Thomas, bless his heart, kept sort of saying, none of these things kind of flow. I want something that flows, you know, something that flows, you know. And I was like, okay. And I said, I hate three-letter acronyms, and we have a lot of letters to work with this full thing. And of course, people call him MTT. So I've said at this point in his presence how much I hate three-letter nicknames for things. And so I sort of caught myself. I said, let's do some three-letter acronyms. Okay, so here's NWSs that look like those Gehry shapes, and then you put them all together and they make that. This was a little bit closer. I sort of had them buying this for a second, and they said, yeah, still no. They wanted to feel more organic, and so I did it like that. And that looks kind of really bad. Then I did this thing where, like, it's a square thing with these irregular shapes inside. So this actually, even as I was doing this, I was thinking, this looks like a logo for a factory where they make, like, anthrax or something. It doesn't look good. But then there's a thing you can do where you can put little pictures in it, and they say, oh, we like the pictures, but still it didn't work. And then, so it was another, and then finally, so it never came to this point with MAD, but finally the most humiliating moment in my career came when the managing director there called up and said, I'm gonna send you a PDF, don't freak out when you get it. She was sort of telling me to brace myself. And so what she sent me were some sketches that Michael Tilson Thomas had done. And I remember I was like, I knew that it wasn't going well, but I just thought this was sort of like, oh, enough, let me tell you the answer, stop trying to guess. And I looked at this and I was like, this is like, and I remember it was a Friday. I went home and I said to my wife, my lovely wife, Dorothy, I said, guy's a conductor, I mean, I could conduct. How hard does that look? I've seen, just do that, but do I? No, I think he has some kind of expertise, even if I don't fully appreciate and understand it. I would not presume to get up and say, here, let me conduct this orchestra. He should just back off and let me design this logo like I'm meant to do. So I had that moment of like denial, and anger, denial, grief, the stages you go through. And then finally I thought, he had done this in he was traveling, he's really busy. And he found time to do this. And I thought, wait a second, this is a gift and it means something. I have to decode this and figure out what it means. And I noticed, like, I remember asking the executive director, is it supposed to like look like a swan or something? I was like trying to, and she said, no, I think he just likes the way the letters are connected to each other. He wanted what I wanted to shove down Mad's throat in a way. And I thought, but you can't make, I said, I tried that before and it doesn't work. And so, but then I thought, maybe. And so what I realized was, the flowing thing he's talking about is exactly what conductors do, right? It's one continuous motion that's rhythmic. And, it looks like that. And it also is sort of what Mr. Gehry designed for him. And it's also sort of the basic principle of music is frequency modulation determines different pitches, which put them all together and you got Mozart. And so I said, maybe you can do something where you take an N, a W, and an S and have them all kind of go together like this. And it turns out, You can. So there's the N for new, there's the W for world, and then you kind of cross them with an S and you have like a little logo. And I showed them to this and they said, you got it, it's done. So that was it. So it looks like that. There it is with some pictures. There it is on an umbrella. There it is. You can see that projected on the interior of the thing right there. If you're down in Miami and you get a chance to go here, it's a beautiful place to see music. It's a gorgeous venue. It's like really nice. And they project things on the exterior of the building and sit in this beautiful park. It really is nice. I couldn't recommend it more. You'll hardly notice the logo. It fits right in. Okay, and so those are all things that called upon imagination and creativity. Sometimes you get something that just requires hard work. We got the assignment to do a pedestrian wayfinding program for all of New York City, all 5 boroughs, Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. And this is to help people kind of find their way around New York, right? And so New York's a huge, confusing place. Parts of it are easy to get around, I think. Parts of it are really confusing. And we were meant to kind of come up with a system that would mitigate all that. We worked as part of a very big team. The assignment it was an initiative that the city had started under its Transportation Commissioner, Jeanette Sadik-Khan, and former Mayor Mike Bloomberg, called Walk NYC. The theory was if people knew where they were going, they would walk more, they'd be more healthy, there'd be less cars on the road, better for the environment. If they were walking on these sidewalks, they might stop and get a cup of coffee or buy a little something at a store, so it's good for the local economy. It's a win-win for everyone, right? Good for you, good for the environment, good for the economy, good for New York. And all you had to do is tell people where to go, right? So it turns out this is real complicated. We worked with a wayfinding consultant. It's not like doing an airport. We've done wayfinding for airports. That's simple. Everyone gets there and everyone wants to do the same thing, want to get on a plane, right? They all go in sort of a bunch of doors, then they find out where their gate is, and it's like gates 1 through 30 there, 31 through 60 are there. You can kind of like do it really simply, relatively so. In New York, everyone's got a different agenda. Some people just wander around, some people in hurries, some people it's their first day there, some people live there their whole lives, some people new to the neighborhood, some people this, some people that. And they could enter anywhere, exit anywhere, really confusing. So our wayfinding consultant helped figure out where the sign should be. We worked with a product designer who sort of figured out what the sign should be made out of, a consulting engineer who figured out how to make them so they wouldn't either fall over or hurt someone who ran into them, and a cartographer who did this digital map according to our specifications that could be used for the entire city. And we had 5 different areas we were launching it in Midtown, down in Chinatown. Midtown where it's simple, Chinatown where it's confusing, Long Island City where it's super confusing, where you can have the intersection of 46th Street, 46th Avenue, and 46th Road, all like the same thing. And then Prospect and Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And then they were also inaugurating a bike share program, and they decided to use our maps for all the bike share stations too. So that was the thing. To get started, we did all these workshops with regular New Yorkers and visitors to New York to see how they got around in the city. We asked them to draw maps of the city. I have lots of these maps. This is my favorite one. Not all of you are likely to know how New York is organized, but this person here thinks that Manhattan is a large island, that to the east of it is a smaller island called Brooklyn, which is surrounded on all sides by water. And then on the other side of Brooklyn is New Jersey. So and the George Washington Bridge crosses to the north of Brooklyn. So I think this is just fantastic, but this works for that person. So what you really realize is that maps, there's the map that actually is on paper, then there's the map that people have in their mind, and they're not the same thing, and they don't have to be the same thing to work. So we did all sorts of things trying to sort out the difficulties of this, and we also realized, I think crucially, that the part we were doing is part of a system that would actually involve things that we weren't responsible for, like how do you get on the right bus? What do you do when you're in the subway? All these other things that already had existing wayfinding. We came up with a basic sort of scheme. These things would be totem poles in a way, like slender monoliths that would have maps and other kinds of information on them. We kind of knew what the name of the goal was here. But then what we wanted to do was have it, again, fit in nicely with the neighborhood. So we studied what street signs look like, what bus information looks like, what subway information looks like. And then, some of you know that my mentor, Massimo Vignelli, my first boss, designed the graphics for the New York subway system. And we actually tried to figure out what a perfect New York typeface would be, and we tried all these different things, and every time we set things in Helvetica, it looked really New York, not because New York is a Swiss, particularly Swiss city, that's really all about 1957 Switzerland, which is where Helvetica is from, but instead, it's because people are just so used to seeing New York City place names in this typeface that it automatically just looks like New York to them. And this typeface on a black background with like color accents. So we decided instead of trying to invent something new, we just going to channel this straight up, right? And so we did a modification of Helvetica that Monotype did for us called a Helvetica DOT. The only difference between regular Helvetica and Helvetica DOT is that all the square dots over the I's and all the square periods and all the square commas and square colons and square umlauts, there aren't any umlauts in Manhattan, but we had them, are all round with Helvetica DOT because they're all dots, right? That was what we thought would be nice. So that's the system font for all of the Department of Transportation for these signs. And so it sort of looks like Helvetica has a little bit of maybe, some people would say, a slightly softer feel to it, I would say. Not that soft, because it is New York after all. A very neutral color palette with the only accent color we sort of had baked into it being sort of this taxi cab yellow. And then we did all this analysis of existing icon systems, which we had to integrate as well into these maps. And then we did a bunch of modifications to the icons. This is a little moment for nerds who like this sort of thing. Because all these things have to coexist in this small area on maps, we decided to make everything kind of fit together really well. And so, if you take a close look, you'll see that the shoulders of those people kind of line up with the curves in the R's. The flare on that woman's skirt is the same that you see at the bottom of the R. The bus and the C, everything is sort of like lined up. So we tried to take the icons and make them feel like the 27th, the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, the 31st letter, et cetera, in the same alphabet, right? I've never been complimented by a stranger on this. No one's ever said, love the maps, and by the way, I noticed, it did not escape note that the curve on the C is the same as the bus icon. But we did, so we're proud of having come up with these new things, and if you go to New York, you can astonish your friends by pointing this out to them, and they'll either admire you or maybe distance themselves from you. So decide what outcome you want before you make your interest known. So we changed some of these. We changed the shopping bag so it has Milton Glazer's I Heart New York logo on it. We changed the bike so it looks a little bit more like a New York City bike rental bike, a city bike. And then we also had to do a bunch of icons for landmarks that people use to navigate. And then we had to make some decisions about how we would do that. Would it be really simple as shown on the top or more complicated and detailed as shown on the bottom? And we ended up with this idea of kind of putting these like flat ghosted buildings in positions like here, the Empire State Building. And so that meant that a army of interns, of human interns, were kind of given the task, and this task continues to this day, of translating things like that into things like this so that they all kind of look like this when they're put on the maps, right? And we're kind of like, this project is done except for integrating new icons into it every now and then. So there's a whole field of these things. We've never figured out a way to make this automated or computerized. It has to be done by people, thank God. So the maps, it all goes together like this. These things, the language is sort of based on modern buildings, simple modern kind of slab, modern architecture. It all fits together in a kit of parts. It's not electrified or digital. It's like very straightforward. They get installed in the dead of night, and then they look like that when they're installed. And I see people like looking at them all the time. So they do have some that are like at big bus stations, particularly out in Queens and in Brooklyn. They have, we've integrated a thing that announces where the next bus is or what bus is stopping there. This shows how it's organized in the bus thing. There's one crazy thing about these maps is that they're heads-up mapping, meaning that whatever direction you're facing, the top of the map is the way you're going. So if you're facing downtown, south will be at the top of the map. When we showed that to people in our office, they all said this is the most insane thing in the world. It will never work. You showed it to people on the street and they get it intuitively. And it's because that's how it works on your iPhone. That's how GPS works. And GPS language is now overtaken conventional mapping language, I think, in terms of what our expectations are. So, and of course everyone has those things in their pockets, supposedly, but it's so, you've traveled around with someone who's like, has that in their hand, they're saying no, go left, no, go right. It's like no fun, it's antisocial, it's confusing, then you don't really trust that person either, right? And so what's so nice about these maps is that you and your friends can kind of decide where you're gonna go. We'll go here, then we'll turn left, we'll do this, and you just make a little journey for yourself together. It's much more pleasant, and not taken last week exactly, but could have been. Even when it's harsh weather, these things kind of like take a beating and still survive. So I'll just show you a couple extra ones, and this is, I think, the very last one because it runs the whole length of my career. It's the longest professional engagement I've had. It's when I started at Vignelli Associates, it was my first job in June 1980. The very first thing I worked on virtually was a project for an organization in New York called the Architectural League. And the Architectural League is this wonderful organization. It's, I've done work with the AIA, I've done work with a lot of architectural organizations. I like working with architects, and I've admired the work that all of them have done. The League is this nice, is small and kind of has done this series of things that are just really interesting and engaging. And when I was like right out of school, the lowliest person in the office, I was given like a low-level task to help someone who was helping someone who was working on something to help Massimo Vignelli realize his vision for this thing for the Architectural League, work we were doing for free. And so I remember, so I worked on that, and I worked on the next one. Then I remember, because we were doing it for free, Massimo Vignelli's wife, Leila, who was really the brains of the operation, she said, Massimo, we're not getting paid anything for this. Why not just let the kid do everything? You're wasting your time with this. And so I worked for Vignelli, the Vignellis for 10 years, and by the end of it, I was doing all the Architectural League stuff. And then I joined their board. Then Massimo, who sort of indeed, maybe at the behest of his wife Leila, decided that maybe it would be a great thing for my career if I just simply took over this full time. So starting in 1990, I started doing all the graphics on my own. So I've been doing this, like I've been now doing this work for the single client for 37 years. So their old seal was like that, a lady sitting on a thing. One of the very first things I did was, they have this series called Emerging Voices for Young Architects, so I did this series of posters for that. Every year I did something new that's sort of psychedelic, day-glow colors, kind of, yikes, sort of gross when it's like that. Collage-y looking things. Any of you guys know this band called Chicago? If you know what those album covers look like, this is exactly that idea. I just love those. So it's like the same thing over and over again. They have this thing called this lecture series they were doing, and for a few years in a row, it sort of worked out. So I think Jim Sterling had a lecture called The Informal Monument, and it turned out you could lock that up in a nice 4x4 grid. And then Arthur Drexler gave a thing called The Unfinished Modern, and that again locks up in a 4x4 grid. Tip to graphic designers, most normal clients will say you can't read things when they're organized like this, but architects will sort of say, yeah, I like the way that's all lines up like that. This is for a lecture for mid-career, exhibition series and lecture series by mid-career architects on the theme of bridges. It has nothing at all to do with designing bridges, and I designed a series of posters that had a real bridge on them. And the person at the league my client at the league kept saying, but this will make people think it's about bridge design. And I said, you've named the series Bridges. It's called Bridges. Well, if you don't want them to think it's about bridges, don't call it Bridges. And then someone who I believe is Ralph Lerner, who I think is still till recently at Princeton, right? Was there for a while. But at any rate, he said, I think there's a picture of some Scottish architects demonstrating the cantilever principle of the Firth of Forth Bridge. Maybe we could use that picture. And I'm like, whatever. And then it turned out to be this picture. It is so great, right? It's about people supporting each other, and it says bridges, and it doesn't look like it's about designing bridges. Same series the following year is called Hypotheses. Same series, one year is called Scale, so that's one big black dot with a tiny little scale in it. They did all these emerging voices things. We did a book celebrating 30 years of emerging voices, so I did 30 years of those posters for these guys. The league moved from their uptown place to 594 Broadway, so we celebrated all the stuff they were doing that year. Then they have this annual party called the Beaux-Arts Ball. That too has a different theme. The theme this year was, the theme of this poster was ... So we made all the O's, dots, and a big dot there. They had a theme called Light Years. This thing's been collected by museums, and I think most people have no idea what it means. They just think it looks neat, but it was actually just a party invitation. It wasn't an important thing. just a free job I did for my friends at the league. And now they really don't do posters for these Beaux-Arts balls things anymore, but they do tote bags instead. So we've had a whole series of tote bags we've done for their balls. One theme was ism. Another theme was craft. So in there somewhere is C-R-A-F-T, trust me. Theme was threshold one year, looks like that. And so it has different versions. And then they honor people with the President's Medal. And one year they honored my mentor, Massimo Vignelli, and my other mentor, Leila Vignelli. And so we took a whole bunch of quotes from the Vignellis and just printed them as placemats. The program was 10 different quotes from the Vignellis and 10 people at a table. Each person would have a different quote. And so I'll just end on this because the phrases are so beautiful. If you do it right, it'll last forever. One life is too short to do everything. And before he died, he proposed with a press sheet. And so I'll leave you with that thought. If you find a good mentor and you can be a good protege and you can be both at the same time, and I highly recommend that, do it. Thank you so much for coming to see me talk. Anyone have any questions? Special prize for the first question. I'm not kidding. Yes. Morgan, what is your question?
How did you get involved with the Vignellis, and how old were you when you started kind of doing that work?
The question was, how old was I when I got involved with the Vignellis, my first job, and how did I get involved with the work? I really lucked out. I dropped off my portfolio there. I did what people did in those days, a version of what any design student in this room will end up doing upon graduation. I visited New York, and I wanted to get a job there, and I had a list of people who knew people who knew people. Someone I knew someone who worked at Vignelli, and I dropped off. I couldn't get an appointment. They said, you can drop off your portfolio, pick it up 24 hours later. I dropped it off there, and a series of lucky things happened. Mr. Vignelli happened to be in the office. He was in the kind of mood he got in sometimes where he was just he was a very enthusiastic guy, but sometimes he would just see something and decide he just loved it. And it could be anything. I remember one time while I was working there, there was a party, and someone had a big bowl of M&Ms at the party, and he started rhapsodizing how great M&Ms are. He said, "This is fantastic. It's a perfect food. Look, they're perfectly ground. There's fantastic colors. Look, they're great. You know what we should do? Every day we should have a big bowl of M&Ms on the reception desk of the office." And then I remember we had a new receptionist, and then she said to me, "Should I get the M&Ms?" And I said, "Wait to see if he brings it up again." He never brought it up again. So. I wasn't there when it happened, but I think he somehow saw my portfolio and had an M&M kind of moment. "Oh, this is great. This guy's great. We should get him to work for us." So I went in to pick up my portfolio, and I met him then. He was really enthusiastic. I was still a senior in school, so I hadn't graduated yet. But then by the time I graduated, I was lucky because someone who was there quit. There was a spot for me. It was, like I said, it was entry level in a way that none of you guys will know this sort of entry level position. It doesn't exist anymore. What you used to be able to do in a starting position in a design firm was working in a kitchen. It literally involved mixing things and working in dark rooms and cutting. It was all physical. It's more like making sandwiches. It wasn't like design at all. But I started out that way, and I just was patient. I worked hard. I loved what I was doing, and I felt I was really lucky to be working there. He was a great mentor. The projects were all really interesting. He treated the designers with a lot of respect. He was really patient with us, and I just ended up staying there. And I stayed there probably longer than I should have. I stayed there for 10 solid years. So I started there at the age of 23. I left when I was 33, and I realized, that was 1/3 of my life on Earth almost. And I was thinking, I'm either going to stay here forever or I'm going to move. But this is the moment to decide. So when I went in to quit, I remember he said, he was very upset that I was quitting. He said, "How old are you anyway?" And he said, I said, 33. He said, "Same age that Jesus was when he was crucified." and so okay, so he's equating me with Jesus, but remember who Jesus' dad was, right? So So you know what position he cast himself for. So don't do what I did. I don't think having a one job for 10 years is a recipe for success. I got lucky with that one. But what I did do was I made the most of that situation. I really worked hard. And I worked hard not out of a sense of duty, but just because I was enthusiastic about what I was doing. And so sometimes I meet people and I can tell they're guilty because they're not enthusiastic. And I just think maybe you're not in the right place. I was lucky I was in the right place. And, I think just if you can find something where you can tell you like doing it, that's sort of, everything else is easy after that. It all kind of comes very easy. Oh, hey, you get the prize. Do you have my book? No. Okay, I'll give you a copy of this when we're done. Okay. Hey, so you had your chance, everyone. Okay. Who wants to ask a question with absolutely no prize attached? Yes.
So when you pitch an idea, do you because you told a bunch of anecdotes about it, do you just go full force into one, or do you present a few different ones, or?
It sort of depends. Sometimes the question was, when we present an idea to a client, do I just show one, or do I show a bunch? So usually it has to do with what reflects the process that we went on. Sometimes I'll say, I think we really have a solution for you, and I want to start by showing you this one. It may be, you may like it, you may hate it. I'll learn something by showing it to you, but instead of, Massimo, my old boss, used to hate the idea of showing multiple solutions to people, because he said, when you go to the doctor, they don't take you into the pharmacy and ask you what color pills you like. They sit you down, they figure out what's wrong with you, then they say, this is the pill you need, right? And that's why you trust your doctor, right? Not like, gee, I don't know, do you like red pills, oblong pills, square pills? It sort of is not, but on the other hand, I've learned some cases I really know. I mean, like that wayfinding system for Manhattan, for New York City, it basically always looked like that. There was never a moment where we said, here are 3 different ways any of these choices could be. Everything was just so logical, followed one from the next. And then indeed with MAD, with the Museum of Arts and Design, I showed that one idea and successfully couldn't do it. There are other occasions where if I really sort of think, sometimes I'll sort of say, in my office, I work with a group of 6 designers, basically, who work on my team at Pentagram. And I'll usually work with one of them on a project. And sometimes I'll say, for this first meeting, let's just try to figure out what they're all about. And this is sort of using the doctor metaphor. It's like, does this hurt if I do this? Does this hurt if I do that? You're sort of trying to figure out, they have some kind of vague complaint. And you want to figure out, is it appendicitis? Is it like a broken ankle? Is it like a brain tumor, or are they hypochondriac? What's really their problem, right? So you can't do that without kind of doing a little probing. Sometimes just talking is sufficient, but sometimes you sort of have to show them something to kind of figure out, are they hungry for change? Or even just figure out how they make decisions. Are they decisive? Are they uncomfortable with reacting to things? And then once you learn that, you can kind of figure out, just by listening, like I said before, you sort of can learn a lot just from that. So I have different ways that I do it, and what I usually try to do is just adjust it for what the particular situation is. It's a good question, thank you. Yeah?
Well, since you've already brought up Mad Men,
yeah.
in a totally different context, when I applied to study graphic design as an undergrad, my department chair responded to a question of mine was, advertising causes problems, designers solve problems. Can you address how you feel about that?
So the quote is, you're attributing it to a professor you had, advertising solves problems. No, advertising causes problems, design solves problems. Maybe. I mean, advertising is, I think that the lines are a little bit more blurred than that. I think that if there was a time, you graphic designers in the room may know the name Paul Rand, who started out working at William Reintraub under Bill Bernbach, who went on to found Doyle Dane Bernbach. So he started out, all his early work was advertising, selling, and like a lot of things that we admire tremendously. The Piet Zwart did amazing ads basically for rubber tiles that we look at them now and we have no idea what they're for. They just look like amazing examples of the Steel era graphic design, but they're actually trying to make people buy tiles. So I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that. I mean, design is trying to get some reaction from people. And I think in some cases, I think providing clear information is doing people a service, right? So I would maintain that the work, if you do a really good wayfinding program and make people less anxious about navigating an unfamiliar environment, that's how you're making life better for them somehow, right? If you are supporting a political candidate and you do effective, design for them, which kind of is like advertising, and you can get them elected, you're making the world a better place. Don't ask me about that personally. I have no personal experience with that particular sequence of events. Even if your candidate gets more votes, still it doesn't always mean you win. But I think it's a little bit, I find that, if designers are with advertising people, usually the advertising people think they're in charge, right? So I think part of that is a defensive whelp against these stuck-up, wealthy, sharp-dressed, smooth-talking advertising people who the designers kind of vaguely feel sometimes envious of, sometimes intimidated by, but always feel like that they have, I think, a deeper understanding of what the process is. And I do think that might be true. I think I think we're better educated in general, and I think and sort of have I know some people in advertising who are very ethical. I know of some people in design who I wouldn't kind of applaud for their ethical compass necessarily, but I do think there's something about just doing nothing but selling things to people that I'm not sure is a good thing. And I'm lucky because I sort of, over the course of my career, I've slowly extracted myself from situations where I'm selling things that I don't feel really enthusiastic about. I mean, I've done design for snack foods, but it's like snacks that I personally really like, that I think, that I think really need to be out there. And and it doesn't matter what it is, it can be something that I think is perfectly respectable. If I don't feel like a personal kind of empathy with it, I just don't think I'll be an effective advocate for it, and on a design level or any other one. Makes sense? Yeah, right behind you, the lady right there.
So throughout your career, how have you gained clients' trust? Like, for example, in MAD, where you came with like 4 or 5 different ideas, and they were just like, like, how do you maintain that trust with clients?
The question is, how do you gain and then maintain trust with clients? That's a really good question, and I actually learned the clients all have the same fear, in my opinion. They're all afraid, they're all entering into an unfamiliar situation. Most people aren't. Some people hire designers all the time, I guess, but a lot of people, it's like just something they do every once in a while or sometimes once in a lifetime. And so they're actually really insecure. And their biggest fear is that you're not going to listen to them. You're going to go off and do something that they really don't like and somehow trick them into accepting it. And the result is going to go wrong and embarrass them in front of their friends and maybe destroy their business or whatever other goals they were hoping to achieve with them. That's really what their fear is, right? And I found that there's one great way to ameliorate that fear, and it's if you just listen to them. And if you, I've gone to meetings where I've hardly said anything, and literally just done nothing but ask questions. And they'll say afterwards, I can tell you really get us. Now, okay, so here's one secret that I don't reveal this often. My lovely wife, Dorothy, I've been married to her since 1980, same moment I started Vignelli Associates, so that's another 37 years. And she was the first and only girl I've ever kissed. So I have no experience at all, picking up women or picking up anyone else. So I sort of but I hear that this whole thing of yeah, that's really interesting. If you're at a bar and talking to someone, that's really flattering to them. They like hearing that if you're being manipulative and Machiavellian. So if you can fake that whole, I'm really interested in what you're saying, that will work up to a point. But the trick is to be actually interested in what they're saying. If you do that, you sort of they'll think they will come to believe that you're sympathetic to their goals. And the best time to listen to them, by the way, is when they're telling you that they don't like your work. And I found that's the hardest time to shut up because you know why they're wrong. And you just can't wait to explain to them why they're wrong. And somehow, somewhere, you think that the path of honor and victory will be if you can somehow litigate this thing to a win on your side. So let me tell you why you're wrong and why you should accept this thing that you say you don't like. I just find, like, tell me more why you don't like it. Tell me more why you don't like it. And I've got younger designers with me, and they're sort of saying, but, and I'm like, no, be quiet. Go on. And you just kind of like get it all out. They'll tell you it's actually much more interesting than if they like it, And in fact, a lot of times, the biggest problem with MAD was that they never said they didn't like that A+D thing. Because in fact, they trusted me too much. They sort of thought, but I could tell it just wasn't working for them. And finally, I just kind of like, they never said that. If they would have just said, I hate that, we're just, Michael, that's stupid. We're called MAD. That's a gift. It's a simple, pronounceable, one-syllable word made out of a three-letter acronym. Go with that. And instead, I was saying, no, throw that away and come up with this new thing. They could have just said, no, that's stupid. You're stupid. Fix it. And I would have said, at first I would have been hurt and pouted a little bit, but then I would have said, you're right. And I'm famous for coming back to the office and saying, that person is like a jerk, and what they said was like outrageous and like awful, but they might have a point in there somewhere, and I think we should listen. So some clients out there may interpret that as meaning just keep rejecting things and it'll just get better and better and better. No, I don't think that works either, so don't do that. But I think if you listen patiently to people, they tend to think, they'll come to think that you have their interests at heart. That's my secret. And then right behind you still? Yeah.
So work when it comes into Pentagram, do you choose the work or does it kind of just filter through whoever is available?
Ooh, that's a good, very high level question that some people in the audience may not want to go into much depth about. However, so the way the Pentagram is set up in a really interesting way, it's actually a collective of designers. It's 20 partners in all in 4 different offices. In my office in New York, I have 7 partners, and they're all better designers than me there's people out there that think that each of them is a better designer than me. And I sort of agree with some of those people about some of those partners, actually. And so they're really, really good. So sometimes someone will call up and it'll be someone I know and they just want to work with me on a project. Sometimes they'll call up and they want to work with me, but I'll think, my partner Luke Heyman would be better at that, or my partner Paula Scher would actually be better at that. And sometimes I'll just do a lateral pass of the project to them. We have this funny financial thing where we all share all the income equally, so there's no benefit to doing more. You don't get more money if you do more work. And so I seem to be the only person who sort of really gets this whole thing about you guys work, I'm going to Detroit, and I'm gonna hang on Detroit for a couple days. But it's, all of us are working designers, so we all really like to work. We don't have account executives, so we have firsthand client management responsibilities, and we have firsthand creative management responsibilities with our team. And the teams are all small like that, and they're all made up mostly of designers and creative people. And we can each hire whoever we want to work with us. And so then if a client comes in, if they're right for me, I sort of will pass them. Sometimes it's just someone who calls up and says, hi, is this Pentagram? I have a project, who can I talk to? We have someone who kind of takes those calls and writes up summaries of them. Then we sort of say, this is a magazine, this is an exhibition job. Maybe Abbott Miller does a lot of exhibitions, it's perfect for him. But then Abbott could say, I've done too many exhibitions, I don't want to do, I don't have time. And then someone else will say, okay, I can take it on. So each one of us sort of has a thing that we are good at doing that sometimes we might do more of or be tired of doing. So it gets passed around. But the fact that there's no advantage to hogging work actually makes it a lot easier. And Pentagram's been set up like that since 1972. It's part of the way it's been organized. So it makes it a lot easier. It's a really interesting model that, to my knowledge, isn't replicated among design firms, at least. There may be architecture firms that are like that, and I think there are a couple of law firms that are like that. But I don't think there are any design firms that are set up that way. Way over there.
What or who inspired you to do graphic design?
Who are my inspirations for graphic designer? The obvious one the relationship that I learned the most from probably was, Massimo and Leila Vignelli, where I worked for 10 years. So that's the obvious answer. But actually, even as I worked for the Vignellis, there were people that worked there that really thought that was the one true way to do design. And the Vignellis, if you know their work, Massimo particularly, was fond of pronouncements about there being only 5 good typefaces and you shouldn't use any more than 5 typefaces. even though he used more than 5 typefaces. I think 5 just sounded like the magic number. I never thought, I always thought there were lots of different ways to solve design problems, a lot of them. They were all interesting, particularly in terms of graphic design. There's an element of fashion to it that always interested me that I'm not very good at, I have to admit. It took me a while to realize I wasn't that good at doing fashionable graphic design. But I've been inspired by, I have 19 partners, all of whom are great designers, and so I can turn around in my chair and be talking to Eddie Opara or Emily Oberman and Natasha Jen or Paula Scher or, great designers who I can just show something like one of these, projects going badly, and I'll turn around and I'll say, they keep rejecting this. Am I crazy or is this bad? And my partners will say, some will say, oh, I don't think it's that bad, but did you consider this? Paula will say, yeah, that is bad. She's like that. She's great that way. She's doesn't have any time to waste, and she'll just say it stinks. Or she'll say something like, if you're digging a hole in the wrong place, making it deeper doesn't help, which I think is another thing that I'm really good at digging. So let's keep digging this. I think that will fix everything. But I've been inspired by Marion Banges, who did that lettering on the Seduction poster, or by, when I came to New York, I wanted to work for Ivan Shemaev, who's another designer who I've never worked for and has a very different style, much more eclectic. And that was my dream job, actually. I never told that to Massimo because that would have hurt his feelings, I suppose. But so I like lots and lots of different designers. And even to this day, I can see something that I just am so struck by that if I see something I really like, I'll send a note to the person who did it. Or even one time he wasn't my partner then, but one time I saw a magazine that Luke Heyman had redesigned at Grand Central Station. I opened it up to see who had done it. I saw that it was Luke Heyman, and I called directory assistants and I asked for his phone number. I called him up and I had to say, you hardly know me, but I just need to tell you what you did to this magazine is so beautiful. It just blew me away. And and we're partners now, actually, not because of that. I think he said, wait, you were that guy that called? So it's a bizarre thing to do. Again, another thing I'm not sure is for everyone, but I think inspiration is everywhere and mentors are everywhere, and I don't think you need to have the person. You don't need firsthand contact. You can just find a TED Talk and say, what that guy says really, inspires me, and I'm just going to follow what that person says and writes. It could be a man, could be a woman, could be someone who's not in your country, someone who is not in your profession. It could be anyone. Over there.
Can you talk about mixing design and politics?
Yeah, the question of design and politics, and you mean literally political, presidential races?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think there's an interesting debate going on, I think, about the role of design and politics right now that has to do with that this isn't the only debate, and it's not the only thing I think about, but I've been thinking about it a lot since November. And as some people might know, I designed Hillary Clinton's logo and had a hand in sort of setting up that program, right? And along the way, a woman I admire quite a bit named Lindsay Ballant wrote an essay that was on Medium, and she was a Bernie supporter, and she basically said everything that was wrong with Hillary Clinton and the status quo Democratic Party was summed up in the idea that they would get a professional logo and kind of use it in a typical corporate identity fashion, and that real movements are grassroots and they come up from below, and it's not a command and control thing with someone saying everyone use this logo. So I think I acknowledge actually that made me really stop and think. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And then as someone who actually went to Washington the day after the inauguration of the Women's March, and you see all those handmade signs with no attempt made to make them all the same font or make them all the same message or all the same anything. And with the capacity that we have today, if you had a great sign, someone would take a picture of it, put it on Instagram, and before long, that sign would be famous. It would be for that day what the Shepard Fairey Hope Obama poster was, And so I think there's something really interesting about the moment we're in, about the way design and politics and the way design professionals and the political process can work together. I think that I don't interpret this as passing the buck, but I think I was as guilty of as anyone else. I think that a lot of the people that were advising Hillary were from the Obama campaign, and like everyone else, I just kept thinking that Obama logo was so great that I want to do something like that, and I will do something like that, and we need something like that or else this won't work. And we tried to design it, and I think the logo we did had these, I was really proud of it, and I was really proud of particularly as election day neared and people were just sending me versions. I always wanted it to be really simple so that anyone could do it, so a 3-year-old could do it. And I saw it baked into cakes. I saw it stacked in beer kegs. I saw it like crocheted and macrameed and glittered and all this other stuff. And I sort of thought, this is like, anyone can do this logo, anyone can own it and kind of take it on. I think that there's something about just the nature of communication now where it's been distributed to the point where I think the future may belong to someone who can master the ability of channeling the design energy that exists in regular citizens and figuring out a way to just tap into that like genuine enthusiasm and make that drive things, right? And I don't think we figured it out yet. And as a design professional, it's tough. I mean, part of it is that, I felt, I was really proud to have done that work, and I thought gosh, I'm a good graphic designer. But there were a lot of people who were thinking, gosh, I'm a good pollster, gosh, I'm a good, political consultant. We've scientifically figured out this outcome. We know exactly what's going to happen, and then you wake up, you're standing in front of a stage in Javits Center, and by 9 o'clock, you can sort of tell it's not going the way you thought it was going to go, and then you wonder, everyone, we all got it wrong, all the analysts, everyone else, and, a few of us graphic designers. So I think that the relationship of design and politics has evolved rapidly. Even 10 years ago, before 2008 and Obama's O logo, if you look at like graphics up to that point, there were like presidential campaigns specifically, no one had ever done anything like that before. I remember being interviewed by someone at Newsweek who said, can you explain why Obama's graphics are so good? And I said, well, for one thing, he's got that logo. And he said, now wait a second, logo, explain to me what that is. And I said, it's like a symbol. And he said, well, I'm on the website now. What's the logo? And I said, the logo is that round, the round thing with the curved lines in it, that's the logo. I can tell he was writing it all down, round thing, logo. And so think about it, then 2016 comes along, and the first thing that gets criticized for every candidate is, Marco Rubio and his like little thing, he's got that little map of the United States. That was his thing, a map of the United States over the thing. Poor Donald Trump when he announces the Pence thing and he has the P penetrating the, it's like, I believe every graphic designer thought it's over. You can't recover from a logo mishap that big, right? It didn't matter whether, you can say whatever he wants on Access Hollywood, but like that kind of logo thing is like not going to work with the American people. But unfortunately, we're in a new world now, and I think, I think there's great graphic design happening in support of progressive causes. There's 2 great magazines that are really beautifully designed. One that's called Jacobin, and one that's called The Baffler. They make me proud to be kind of a lefty in America because they're the best designed small magazines that are out there. They're really great. They do great visual storytelling. They take information that's complicated and political and make it accessible and compelling. And I think that's it's less about logos and less about, wait a second, I've got the big logo that'll brand our big movement. I think it's just about people kind of putting stuff out there with as much imagination and enthusiasm and verve and anger, if that's what you got, and getting it out there and just, joining the conversation with whatever tools you've got to work with. So that's the difference, I think. I can go on all night, but I just want to make sure.
How about one more?
I'll do 2 more, because I'll do first you and then you, okay?
So if you think about any director to career as a graphic designer, what would you say is one thing that you would definitely stress to be taught to graphic design students? That you don't think we're being taught?
I think, and this is something, when I went to the University of Cincinnati, and the course of study that I had, I just have a bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Science in Graphic Design, that's what I have. And what I underestimated was, what I sort of didn't realize, and this is specific really to graphic design, more than any other design discipline, is because graphic design is essentially about communication, the message is almost never graphic design. The message is something else. Someone comes to you and they say, I want to be elected president. I've got this museum. It's about arts and crafts. I need to help people get from Van Nostrand Avenue to Wythe Street. These are all problems that have nothing to do with like typefaces or colors or shapes or any of those things. None of the things you were taught in school are preparing you to do those specific subjects. So the one thing that I tell people is, one thing you could do is get go to a good liberal arts college and get some broad education about the classics, history, economics, science, everything, and then get a graduate degree in graphic design. I didn't do that, but if I was doing it all over again and my parents were richer than they actually were, I would consider that. But it's actually not necessary, because the trick is that you can get paid to get that same education, and all you have to do is what I said to you up there, is just listen, because they'll tell you everything. I didn't know anything about politics. I just sat down with these consultants and I sort of like found out how it all breaks down and what thing happened when. I didn't know anything about I designed, I've had the New York Jets for a client. I don't even like football that much, but I sort of like really learned about football. If you get enthusiastic, this goes to that other thing about enthusiasm being the thing you need. If you get enthusiastic about about the subject matter you're working with, you'll learn about it and then you get educated that way. The worst thing you can do is sort of think that the object of the game is making a shape, making a color, picking a typeface. Those are all just means to an end. The real end is sort of like there's a human being out there that you want to communicate with, and those tools kind of will aid that communication, but they are not actually the communication. Those are things that we care about, that normal people need not worry about. What they really care about is what's how do I find my way? How do I know how to vote? Help me understand this thing. What brand of peanuts should I buy? It could be all sorts of different things, but your role in that process is helping them not with typefaces, but with peanuts or politics or something else, right? So if you keep that in mind, it's pay attention. Like the better craftsperson you can be, the more you know about shapes, colors, all that other stuff, the better you are at your job. But the real key to success, and all the good designers I know somehow make a leap to having enough enough of their attention span, enough of their bandwidth, if you want to call it that, using cliche, to be able to take in all that stuff that graphic design is about, not itself, but the other stuff it's really about. So that's the trick, if you ask me. That was a good last question, but I'll take you as the last question. Top that, if you will.
Okay, well, I'll start with a disclaimer. I'm not actually an architecture student, but I'm curious how working with architects has affected your practice.
Oh, yeah, it's affected it tremendously, as you can tell. And I sort of I think I made fun of architects a little bit in the course of this whole thing. But architects are, what you learn is that the thing about graphic design is that, and don't take this the wrong way, graphic design, but the stakes are relatively small usually. Occasionally you're working on something where it really is a life or death thing. But usually it's like, picking a typeface. It's like, whatever. And sometimes even when you care about it the most, you're like you sort of want to make this argument like, it doesn't matter, let me pick. Sort of like, if it doesn't matter, why do you care? Like why do you care, Mr. Klein? Let me care. I care because I'm crazy. Who cares why I care? And so you get in this weird circular arguing about something that doesn't really matter. With architecture, the stakes are really high. You're building something that potentially could last a long time. That's going to affect many, many lives. That could, in fact, fall down and hurt people. The liabilities are vast, the responsibilities are vast, and then also architects, unlike us graphic designers, if I'm designing a business card for someone or a website for someone, there's always a moment where I can kind of simulate the experience of looking at that homepage or holding that business card pretty closely, where I can here's something, I made this up, it won't be exactly this paper, but it'll look something like this, and if the client is worried about what it's going to look like, they can pretty much get 95% of the way there just by a prototype I can show them. Architects can never fully prototype what they're showing their clients. And so that means that they have to come up with all these different means to help their clients along in the process. And having collaborated with architects and watched them navigate that journey, it's been an amazing education for me. Partly because I've had in my role, I've been able to work with so many different kinds of architects. Some of them just do it based on pure theater. They just have such big personalities that people just clap at the end of the presentations and don't ask any questions. Sometimes they're very patient. They work through the whole thing. Sometimes it's when we work with Frank Gehry, It's like I remember, he basically will take a client back into the studio, show models, start talking about the models. The client will ask a question, like, what if that were there? And Gary will literally say, you mean like this? And he'll just take the thing off the model and like ask for some tape and tape it on something else. And just watching, and you can tell that those clients, it must be, I assume it must be like some sort of strategic way of manipulating clients on one hand, but I think it's also it's about the attitude that Gary has to the process and having people participate in the process. And he's just one way of doing it. I've seen all these other ways of doing it too. So that's probably the thing I've learned most from architects, how you can actually treat every decision as if the stakes are high, and how you have to master the language of, I wouldn't say persuasion, because I think that, persuading is like for advertisers, if you want to go to that metaphor. It's really explanation and empathy that the best of them are good at, and the best of any design, that the best of anyone in any design profession really masters to get their job done. So that ended up being a good final question. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. It's great to see so many people from outside of LTU. I want to remind everyone that we have an auction going on in A210, which is the AIS auction. So it's down in the gallery space on your way out. Check it out. So thank you guys for coming, and thank you again to Michael.
MORGAN? You're welcome.
I wanted to ask for a book, but we only got one.